Huh? Now remember, this is talking about the days in front of us. And they shall fish them. Now the reason I'm sharing this with you is because some of you have been very complacent. And you've really not made up your mind if you want to embrace these truths that Yahweh's revealing to you in the last day, the truths about the Sabbath and the restoration of the feast and festivals and the calendar of Yahweh and some of the other fundamental truths that we're calling the Messianic roots and the Hebrew restoration movement. And simply because we've been complacent and lethargic in embracing them, we're resisting the fishers and their attempt to get us out of the bondage. But Yahweh tells us here in verse 16 that afterward he's going to send for many hunters, and they will hunt them from every mountain, from every hill, and out of the holes of the rocks. Did you hear what I just said? The hunters are coming. Now, the only way that they will not ferret you out of your hiding place will be if you deny a relationship with Yahweh. And if that's the case, you won't have to worry about the hunters. They're coming nonetheless. I would suggest that we need to pay attention to these signs that Yahweh is revealing to us in these Torah portions. The children of Israel were given the privilege of seeing before they ever went into bondage the prophetic nature of the salvation message that he had lived in front of them, not only through Jacob, but through Joseph and the patriarchs that had been before them in Isaac and Abraham. As I was looking at this particular Torah portion, the number 17 struck me, and I was reminded of Psalm 83, 6 through 11. And it just happens that you have a combination of that number 10 and number 7, which totals 17. And in that particular confederation of numbers, you see that Yahweh has a group of 10 enemies and a group of 7 enemies who had aligned themselves together for one purpose, and that was to make Israel extinct, to cut them off as a people from the earth. And I've got news for you. It's going to happen again. Now, as we begin to look at Psalm 83, verses 6 through 11, this is very important because, as I said earlier, it's extremely prophetic regarding what is about to happen in front of you and I. And as I was looking at this Torah portion, I thought that maybe I should stop long enough to examine the names of these individuals that have lined themselves up together against the house of Israel to see if Yahweh indeed would reveal a hidden message to us. And he did just that. Psalm 83, let's begin in verse 6, and I'll read it for you. Well, let me read verse 1 first. Keep not thou silence, O Yah, hold not your peace, and be not still, Yah. For lo, your enemies make a tumult, and they that hate you have lifted up their head. You and I could be making this same declaration as we speak. They have taken crafty counsel against your people and consulted against your hidden ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. And last night we looked at that just briefly. And a lot of those in the church world today believe in replacement theology, and so it doesn't bother them that Israel will be cut off because we've been quote unquote grafted in. But to properly treat this subject, you have to look at the word Israel in the Hebrew language. To break it apart, it's Yisrael, and it literally means those that stand upright or in a righteous relationship before him. And so that becomes a very broad term that includes everybody that considers himself a believer, whether you could trace your lineage or not to the house of Israel. They boast themselves, saying that they would cut Israel off from being a nation. Verse 5 says, for they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against you. And he begins to give a demonstration. And those tenfold names of this confederation in verses 6 through 11, as you begin to look at it, you'll find that sages, scholars all agree that no such group listed as these 10 have been found in the past history of Israel, and so it has to be a confederacy that will be in the future. And if that's the case, you and I have to examine them because we need to know what's about to happen. And what we're going to do, we're going to look at these names. First of all, let's look at the word Edom, Strong's number 123. If you've ever noticed it before, you can see that it has 3 Hebrew letters, Aleph, Dalet, and the Mem. and they form the same word as Strong's number 121, Adam, and 119, Adam. 121 is, if you start looking at them, you'll find that they're all basically close to one another. The word Adam, Edom, both have the inference that something or someone is red and ruddy. But if you look at it, you'll notice that on the end of that word, Adam, you have the suffix dalet mem, which is a word for blood. And the aleph on the front of it is inferring that the individual is connected to this blood. And of course, you and I realize it's talking about a covenant cutting with an individual. And when Yahweh cut the covenant with the Adam, it was simply because he had slaughtered the lamb before the foundation of the world. And so the Adam would be the individual who would be covered by the blood. Are you with me? And so basically when you hear that term Adam, it's inferring the blood that covers. And that's why Yahweh can look at you. Even though you may have the stain of sin in your life, if you have been covered by the blood, you become an Adam. Amen. And he sees the blood in his face. Are you following me? Let's look at the word Ishmaelite. Strong's number 3459, Ishmael. And if you look at the Strong's Concordance, it actually translates it as Yah will hear from the word Shema. But if you'll notice, in the Hebrew language, there is a yod suffix on the end of it. That suffix indicates possession. And so basically what it's saying here is that my Yah will hear me. That makes this thing a little bit more personal. The word Ishmael is also spelled, the root of it, as Strong's number 3456. It's spelled the same, and that word is Yesham. If you look at the word 3456 in the Hebrew, it literally means to be desolate, to lie in waste, to put something in its place, and to intentionally place it where it can be made desolate. We're talking about a people group here. Are you hearing me? Let's look at the next word, Moab, Strong's number 4124. Again, the Strong's Concordance, and the reason I'm sharing with you the definition from the Strong's is that it's a good starting place, but sometimes the Strong's Concordance really doesn't treat it properly, and you need to go just a little bit deeper. The word Moab here, translated by the Strong's, has it of his father. But if you'll break it down, you'll notice that it's a compound word, and you have the mem prefix to the front of it. And that word could be me or ma. And you know from your Hebrew classes, the word me in Hebrew is the word in English who. And the word ma is the English word what. And so this could literally be translated what or who's the father. Do you know that's a pretty sad indictment against the vast majority of the generation that's alive in this country today? We don't know who the Father is. And I'm not talking just about the Creator known as the Father. I'm talking about the absence of the fathers in the houses. It's an epidemic. Do you think maybe it's in keeping with the prophetic nature of this particular word right here? I think so. Let's look at the next word, Hagarine. Strong's number 1905. It's actually from the word Hagar, but if the way this is defined, it's the word Hagri. And again, there's a prefix, a preposition attached to it. That is the word ha, which means the. And then you have the word ger, ha ger. And that's literally a phrase that means the stranger. Also known as the sojourner. You could also call this group of people the wanderers. And as soon as I saw that, I was reminded of Cain, Genesis chapter 4, who became the first wanderer. He dwelt in a land called Nod, also pronounced Nud, and that literally meant the one who would wander from the presence of Yahweh. The word wander means to intentionally stray away. It's not inferring an accident. It's an intentional straying away from the presence of Yah. And of course, Nimrod was another wanderer. And there is going to be a final wanderer in the last days, and we know him as the anti-Messiah, who would intentionally stray away and do everything he can to draw you away from the presence of Yah. And let's look at the next word in this confederacy of 10 nations in the future that will align themselves against the house of Israel. This word is Gebal, Strong's number 1381. If you look at the root of it, it's actually from 1379, and it means to set boundaries, to have some parameters, some guidelines established, to set some limits. And when I saw that, and here's the way I study. While I'm looking at words, Yahweh will drop things into my spirit sometimes and remind me that this word can be attached somewhere else, or this is in keeping with another thought. And here, when I saw this thing about boundaries being set, I also know that you can compromise boundaries. And I was instantly reminded of Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, because it's in keeping with a future confederacy. And Daniel 7:25 says that the anti-Messiah, a king with a fierce countenance in the last day, would rise up, and he would seek to do what? To compromise the Torah, the law, and the season. He would seek to change the times and the laws. For what purpose? To wear out the saints. And if you finish reading it, you find that he does for 42 months. Are you following me? You also have to understand that boundaries were something that Yahweh has set in the earth, and man has absolutely no right to change them, to compromise them. And we were talking about time being a boundary last evening. The calendar of Yahweh is a boundary that's set in creation for the express purpose of giving you insight regarding how he's going to work in creation and in your life in particular on a divine appointment schedule. And as he set those boundaries, they're fixed. The Sabbath is one of those. The 7-day week is a fixed boundary. Yahweh said it. We have absolutely no right to compromise it or cross it, to change it. Let's look at the next name, Ammon. Strong's number 5983. As you look at what Strong's defines it, it's referred to as being tribal. But if you will break it apart, you'll find there's the ayin mem, that's affixed to the front of it, and that means people or nation. And on the end of it, you have a vav nun suffix. And when you see the vav nun added to a word, it's actually implying that there's a smaller version of the root word, or that the root word and the result of it is going to be diminished. And so when you see Ammon, it's actually inferring that something is going to happen to diminish this people, this nation. Are you with me? Let's look at the word Philistine. Strong's number 6429, Peleshet. Strong's defines it again as the land of the sojourners. Didn't you just hear that a few moments ago regarding another people group, the sojourner? We'll look at Amalek in a second. I'll get back to it. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. The word Peleshteth is from the root of Strong's number 6428, Palash, which means to roll or to wallow in dust or ashes, and it depicts great distress. Did you know that there is a group today called the Philistines, Peleshteth, also known as the Palestinians? Yahweh is going to cause them to wallow in dust and ashes in great distress. It's very sad because they're being drawn by this future king. The spirit of this anti-Messiah is already working in the earth. Let's look at the word that I missed, Amalek. Strong's number 6002. It's defined by Strong's as a dweller in a valley, but if you will look at it, I believe it should be properly rendered with that aleph, which means future tense or first person indicating I will, and the malak, which is a verb that means to wring off or to sever, and that term is used in the sacrificial worship to wring off the head or off the neck of a bird, a pigeon, or a dove. And this word here is telling you that Yahweh is going to wring off something's neck, to sever it. Amen? You have the next nation is Tyre. Strong's number 6865. It's actually rendered in the Hebrew with the Zadi Resh Zor, which means rock. But it is also closely related to 6862 Sar, which means narrowness, tightness, distress, misery, an enemy, a foe, an adversary. And as you begin to look at these, you'll find he has something very powerful and prophetic that he's trying to reveal to us as a company of believers Tune in to track 2, and we'll pick up with the last of these 10 nations. Thank you for listening.